Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to discuss how to rebuild your regulator. The phenomenon that happens sometimes, and I'll explain it to you a little bit better when you get the regulator out, but I see on forums, and this doesn't just apply to ed guns, it actually applies to all kinds of regulated guns, but I'll see the question, hey, how come my first shot is, let's say you had your gun set at 900 feet per second, and in that 900 feet per second, it was shooting fine. And then maybe a few months had gone by and you notice your very first shot after the gun has been sitting for a while is shoot somewhere in the neighborhood of 650 or 700 feet per second. And the more rapidly you shoot the gun, the higher the speed becomes with each shot. And as long as you keep the gun operating, it seems like it shoots a relatively quick speed, although you're not getting a very consistent shot string. So what that basically means is that your regulator is leaking. Okay, so at the beginning of the video I'm going to teach you how to take the regulator out of the gun. Now, this is going to apply to every EDgun R5 series, from the R5 30 caliber, R5M 177 through 25, and of course the Lelya, which is all three of these, or all four of those, are built on the same exact platform. So you're going to need a 4mm hex wrench. That's to take the stock off. Next step you're going to do to take the air tube off, you're going to you're going to cock the gun, put the battery in the forward position, turn the safety on. This is really important because we don't want to drop a hammer on an empty air tube. It can break parts here. This has got a true sear block, so it's going to protect your gun. You're going to turn it over and you're going to find a 4mm hole right here. This sled right here on this 4mm hole needs to go counterclockwise. As soon as it's loose, push that down, and you're going to tighten the sled to the bottom of the frame. Now when the gun is cocked, this comes off much easier. So what you're going to do is turn it up on a slight 45-degree angle, lift it with my fingers. If you can see how I just kind of lifted it here like that, and you're going to slide it right off. Now there are two bleed screws, one that sits behind the dust cover and one that sits at the bottom. We're going to want to get this one at the bottom here, and the reason being is that the dust cover has a detent ball and a small spring, and when you pull this dust cover off, a lot of times you can lose that. A 2mm hex wrench for this one. Now, one important part about this little detent right here, this ball, the air actually doesn't sit on the grub screw, it sits on a ball, a stainless steel ball behind in a little cup, and this little cup actually seals the hole. So do not take this all the way out or you'll lose the little detent ball behind it. And so all you got to do is just crack it and be a little patient. Okay, so now that your air is stopped, I don't even really bother looking at the gauge. It's not a good indicator of when the tank is empty. The best indicator is pushing on the valve. And that's because even just a little bit of air, if it's less than 5 bars, it won't read on the EDMU, or you won't really be able to see it even on an analog gauge. So you're going to want to push on the valve and make sure everything is empty on the gun itself. And when you push on the valve, you want to hear no air come out of the transfer port. So now that you have that, the next step should be you're going to unscrew the valve housing. Now there should not be any resistance at all on the valve housing when you unscrew it. It should just come out nice and easy. And because of the valve housing is attached to the plenum and the O-rings in there, a lot of times, most of the time, your valve housing is going to leave the plenum on the valve housing and your regulator will be stuck inside. So what I do is I use a little bit of air. You're going to put and do this very slowly, please. But I usually put this on a firm surface, so I'm not going to lose it. And I barely just crack it and give it a second to push the regulator out. And that's it. Regulator's out. I'm going to pull it all the way out. Alright, so we're going to talk about the parts of the regulator real quick. And the valve housing. So this is the valve housing. This is your valve. The valve seals at the bottom of the valve housing. This is your valve return spring. This Helps keep the valve shut a little bit, but most importantly, keeps it pressed against the bottom of the valve housing seal in order to, when you fill on an empty gun. Next on top is called the plenum. And then sitting on top of that is the actual regulator. So this is the regulator. This is the high pressure side. The Belleville washers and pistons sit in here. This is the plenum. This is the valve housing and your transfer port. So the hammer hits the back of the valve here, opens the valve. The pre-charged air that sits in the plenum escapes here, goes out your barrel, and that's what makes your pellet fly. So if you can imagine, the manufacturer, Ed particularly, and his team, they design a gun that has a certain amount of hammer weight and spring tension. And let's say, for the sake of argument, that you had set that hammer and spring tension at 100 pounds per square inch. It's going to be more than that, but we're just going to use nice round numbers to help explain the phenomenon that happens when your regulator needs to be rebuilt. So let's say that in order to open this valve properly and drain this entire plenum to get your 900 feet per second, you have to hit this valve at 100 pounds per square inch. So let's say that sitting on top of this valve right here is the pre-charged air that's in this plenum. Let's say that it's sitting at 100 pounds per square inch. So it overcomes that pressure, opens the valve, and expires the air. Now when your regulator leaks in either the top piston or the bottom piston O-ring, what happens is, over time, the pressure sitting on top of this regulator is, say, at 200 bar. And it begins to overfill the preset, which in this case is 125 bars. You can see right there on the regulator. So when your regulator leaks, what happens is this pre-charged space begins overfilled with too much pressure. And the hammer was set for a lesser pressure. So maybe now, instead of 125 bar, the slow leak gets it up to 180 bar. And so you basically ends up short stroking this piston. So when you short stroke this piston, it doesn't expel all the air out of here. The volume is not great enough in order to give you the speed. That's why the first couple shots you get will be a lower speed, and then because this is a slow leak, if you rapidly shoot, you're not giving the chance for this plenum to overfill, and that's why you're not noticing the problem. But the next morning, or maybe let the gun sit for 45 minutes to an hour, and you notice the problem. So the parts of the regulator is this top part here just unscrews. And you might need to use a little bit of force there because of the grease. But we're going to pull this regulator apart. And take a look inside here. Alright, so the parts of the regulator are, we're going to pull this piston off. So the regulator really doesn't go bad. You can see how simple it is. It's just a series of Belleville washers, which is just a fancy name for a cupped washer. They go together like a clamshell like this. And these are actually just spring washers. As you can see, Ed has actually decreased the number of springs. There used to be 12, I think, 6 stacks in here. And now there are 3 stacks. So a much more compact regulator. These stacked go a certain way. They're not in a particular order, so they can be interchanged. But the spring tension is really important, and it's important that you keep these greased. But generally, the Belleville washers are not your problem. It's going to be these 2 little O-rings right there. Okay, the bottom one is an 8 by 1.5, and the top one is a 5 by 1.5. So these 2 little 5-cent pieces right there can ruin your shooting day. I know it sounds ridiculous. So what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and pull this off, and these are going to be, you're going to use Buna 70 O-rings. And if I'm going to replace one, I'm going to replace both of them. So I just use a little pick here, pull those off, and you're going to replace them with an 8 by 1.5 on the bottom of the piston. And a 5 by 1.5 on the top. Now, you're going to take a nice little rag here, and while you got these washers, you're going to clean off all the gunk, because we're going to reapply a small amount of lubricant to your washers. Okay, so if you guys have seen my videos before, you know how much I love Super Lube. You can get this stuff on Amazon. I don't sell it, so I'm not pushing a product here. Amazon's probably the cheapest place to get Super Lube synthetic grease. What I love about it is that it's really good in cold weather too. Put a little dab on my fingers here after I clean it, and I'm just going to gently get my piston here. Now make sure that you stack these like little clams, like the C's. They go together like that. Okay? They don't go like that because there's no spring. What we want is a spring action between the two. So we're going to put these two little C's together like this, like two little clams, clamshell, and you're going to restack your piston. And again, you don't need a whole lot of lube, just a little bit on each one. Make sure they're stacked correctly. And the last one. Okay, now our piston stack is back together. We're going to go ahead and, this is the top of the regulator, that's the bottom. Turn the top over, take your piston, grab the stacks with your fingers gently, slide it in, and push until you feel the O-ring seal inside the high pressure side of the regulator. Once it's sealed on the high pressure side, take the low pressure side of the regulator, screw it back together. Throw away your old O-rings because they're worthless. You're going to put your regulator back together, and my recommendation is I would change these three O-rings. These are 25 by 3. These three O-rings. When you put this back inside, change these O-rings out. These O-rings are really critical because the regulator has to breathe. So there's the hole. You can see it splits the breathing hole right there. And when the regulator dumps and it refills, it has to know what the atmospheric pressure is in order for it to fill properly. So that's why these O-rings are important. So you're going to replace those, but for time on this video, I'm not going to. So we're going to put a little bit of silicone-based grease. No petroleum products, please, inside the regulator. It's very imperative you don't use petroleum products in here. Use silicone, pure silicone grease or Super Lube, some kind of synthetic grease. No petroleum products. Now you're going to take and you're going to gently push past the first threads and screw it back together. And of course, don't forget to close. I always forget to do this. So now we're going to fill our air tube. To put it back, you're going to take your transfer port. That's going to go up towards the gun. This is going to go to the bottom. So again, take your gun on a nice 45-degree angle. Transfer port up. Gun upside down, that is. Slide it in. Now on a Lelya, you don't really need a bottle, but I will tell you, the longer the gun, the more you need a bottle to protect your moderator. Or take the moderator off if you're going to do that so you don't scratch it. So you're going to grab the valve housing with your fingers. This is the simplest way I found to do it. And guide it up like this. You can see how that moves. Guide it up. Put the gun at a 45-degree angle, and it slides right in. I'll do it one more time for you. Wait till you feel the stop. So, wait till you feel the stop like that. Pull up, and slide it up. Now, 4mm hex wrench again. Clockwise, loosen, pull it up. And put it tight. Now, I famously asked Ed, hey, how tight does that have to be? And he says, tight. So, that's my answer to you. When you ask me how tight it is, tight. I guess tight enough not to move. Now your gun is repaired and back in service. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope that was helpful. I'm going to have more videos on how to repair leaks, take the gun apart, adjust the trigger, whatever. So I hope that was helpful, and we'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.